righty. Good evening. Welcome to the July 26th, 2021 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting of the Grafton Planning Board is being conducted with both in-person and remote participation by board members. Tentatively, we have one board member who we expect to join by remote participation, not here yet, and by members of the public. Remote participation by the public for the public comment agenda item and anything else for which the board chooses to accept public input will be using the Zoom Q&A or raise hand feature. When using Q&A to ask a question or make a comment, your comment or question will be read and responded to at an appropriate point in the proceedings. If you raise your hand on Zoom, you will be enabled at an appropriate point to enter the meeting via voice or video to make a comment or ask a question. In all cases, whether in person or remote, please identify yourself by name and address for the record. And every vote will be taken by roll call. I think I don't have to invoke that until a remote member is actually present.
Sounds right.
So meanwhile, I do have a quorum of the board present here in the room. And with that, we will proceed to our first agenda item, which is public input. If there is any member of the public attending this meeting who wishes to make a comment or ask a question or raise an issue that is not already on the agenda this evening, then now would be the time to do that. I don't see any requests for public input here, so we'll move on to our action items, the first of which is a bond reduction request at the Bull Meadow subdivision. And where are we at with that?
So we did receive a bond reduction request for Bull Meadow, which we sent to Graves for their calculation. And their for section 1, there's two sections for this. For section 1, their 20% contingency with 100% cost estimate is a reduction to $279,000. And the budget for section 2, the 20% with 100% cost estimate rounded is a reduction to $143,000.
And that's a reduction from the original amount of just under 1.4 in the first section and 700,000 plus in the second section. So
Correct.
the Graves proposal for a reduction would be to the sum of 279 for the first and 143 for the second.
Correct.
Any questions or comments or discussion?
Wait a minute, where's the 279? Oh, here we go. Gonna act on both of them at the same time. One motion.
That would seem to be a workable approach.
I move that we reduce the bonds per Graves' recommendation or notifications.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded that the bonds be reduced to the amounts recommended by Graves. Any discussion of the motion? Hearing none. Since all the voting members are in the room at the moment, I will simply call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare the motion carried unanimously.
Wow.
That's taken care of. Our next action item is a modification of the decision under Site Plan Application 2021-01.1 to correct conditions C6 and C7.
Yeah, so the request here is upon review of the filing for plan approval. So this project was approved recently under plan approval, which is not site plan approval and not a special permit. So it actually does not get recorded with the Registry of Deeds. Conditions C6 and C7 are standard conditions that we typically have in decisions in terms of requiring that they be recorded with the Registry of Deeds, and since that is not traditionally the case in this process.
And that would be because as a village mixed-use district, village mixed-use doesn't have in this case, this particular project does not come under the site plan approval.
Correct. It's simply a plan approval, which is a separate process. Yeah.
Yeah, and technically, as I recall, the plan approval under village mixed use isn't necessarily even, at least in some cases, doesn't even involve the board.
Yeah, so it's the plan approval authority. Typically, it's the planning board, but depending upon projects, it could be other
I mean,
administrative.
as I recall, this is something that I remember running across a while back and looking at a previous village mixed use project that under some circumstances at least, and I didn't think to read up on this before tonight, but under some circumstances, the approval of a village mixed-use plan is really falls under the building permit, and the approval is from the planner, but not from the board.
Correct. Yeah, and so since this is, especially in the case of modifying the language and the decision, I felt that it was important to have the board vote on this and actually put that into record. So
Yes, because I think we shouldn't. It best not not have it be represented. Where's my tongue today? Not represented as a formal site plan approval.
correct.
So even though we kind of process it as that, in hindsight, we realize that, again, projects in the village mixed-use district are sometimes handled a little differently than we're used to. This particular project, I believe, is only the second project in the South Grafton Village mixed-use district that we've dealt with. The previous one did, because of the density, it was a special permit. That's one at 274 Providence Road. So that was properly handled as a special permit. But yeah, it's projects in this category that don't fall under the special permit in the village mixed use that the procedure is a little bit unusual and non-traditional, shall we say. With more projects in village mixed use, it will become traditional, but for now, okay, so that's the explanation, and I think that would be, it sounds to me like it would be appropriate for the board to update that decision to reflect reality here. Any other discussion, any questions, comments?
So what would be an appropriate motion?
So the motion that we're requesting is to strike conditions C6 and C7 from the decision.
So moved.
moved.
Second.
Gotta be quick around here.
All right, moved and seconded to strike conditions C6 and C7 from the decision under discussion. Any discussion of the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare the motion carried unanimously.
Maybe we ought to tell the world.
Yes, I didn't think of it right away at the introduction of the meeting, but yes, we have a new associate planning board member to introduce, Ms. Maura McCormack. This is her first, and we hope not the last, if we don't scare you off right away, meeting as an associate member of this board. Welcome on board.
Thanks.
Okay, so, thank you for that, Bob. Moving on then, that exhausts our set of action items. And let's move on to discussion items. Discussion item A, fire sprinklers and new projects. So explain to us what this is all about.
Yeah, so this is, there's a video, if you read the email, that was passed along by Mike Killeen, our fire department fire chief. Captain, rather, and looking at in new construction of single-family and two-family homes, there's resources available and potential avenues to push for them to include fire sprinkler safeties in those developments. Obviously, sprinkler systems, as we all know, are fairly costly, but having new construction is an opportunity when developers are doing that to install these systems that are more residential based. And that technology has come a long way. It does provide firefighters, in the case of a fire, additional time to kind of work with the fire and put it out, which has benefits for obviously safety and also potential to save the structure. What I would ask is, if you haven't already, please take some time to review that video. And if you have questions, I'm happy to reach out, or we can bring Mike Clean to one of these meetings and kind of discuss any questions that you guys have. If that's some regulations that we'd like to look into, we can take a deeper dive, but at the very least, please just take a...
I'd say, let's hear what we might be able to do. Right now, I have no idea whether we're changing zoning or subdivision rules or, whatever.
Yeah, I took the time to review the material and watch the video, and it seems, and I think we this is a topic that we would want to explore further. And so tonight we're just sort of getting the discussion started, but part of it, part of what will, and this doesn't affect this board, but part of it, we could think in terms of the building code. Right, the proponents of this could be thinking in terms of building code. That they made the point in the video that Massachusetts has not adopted statewide in a building code any requirement for residential sprinklers in the 1 or 2 family cases. That's something that, that's one thing that Grafton may or may not want to think about. But as it affects this board, I mean, what I saw, and this is like with one review of the video, and it's probably worth following up on. What I saw was the idea that in the subdivision regulations, one could build in some incentives, either an absolute requirement or simply some incentives for developers to equip their homes with sprinkler systems.
I guess that's you're saying in the zoning, or no, in the subdivision. Okay.
Right. At least that's what I got out of that so far.
Our next round of subdivision rule
Yeah.
change.
I think
Done any decade now.
Yeah, I think that touches on some other topics that, particularly the notion of what the incentives might be and how the incentives interact with how the town wants to see things developed. Because the incentives they suggested by and large were incentives for allowing increased development or increased density in return for equipping the fire sprinklers. So that's something that, off the top of my head, seems to me like it ought to be considered in the context of updating their master plan. Because if in the master plan we continue, as the last master plan did, to say that we don't want a lot of we want to curtail development rather than encourage it, these incentives would tend to go in the opposite direction of that. So that's this in terms of subdivision rules, at least, any incentives for equipping homes with sprinklers has to be considered, I think, in the context overall of what Grafton wants to see in terms of subdivision development.
I have a question. In cases like the new facility that is going to go in at Pine Street at the train station. That's a large facility. Are sprinkler systems, is that required in one of, a development that size?
Yeah, so under building code, I'm not proficient in that, so I don't know what the specific triggers are, but certainly 8 Pine Street would,
That's just,
include a sprinkler system.
that's just
At that
part
scale,
of,
for
at
sure,
that
yeah.
scale, yes, okay. That's what I would expect.
Yeah, right. The focus of what they're talking about in this presentation
Is
is
just one
specifically
and
one and two family
Two-family,
homes.
right.
There was a time eons ago when each town had its own building code, but then we got to a state code. Is there an option for a town to have change, probably additional provisions in a local building code?
I would have to talk to, Bob Berger about that. He's more,
I ask about that and what the procedure would be to get that, because I don't know who adopts the building code.
It is my impression that the town adopts a building code, and by and large, they adopt the state code, possibly with some variations.
Okay,
But how that happens,
yeah,
I'm
No,
not sure.
I thought you just had to take the state code, but, that well beyond anything that I've had in touch
Yeah,
with.
that's,
Because I'd like that path. I'd like to, thoroughly understand that path. Has this gone, has Bob even seen this?
I don't know if Mike has shared it with
No,
Bob
I-
Berger,
I'll-
but I haven't. I passed it along to the planning board, but I can definitely reach out and have that
Would you?
conversation with him. Yeah, we have our development team meetings every Thursday, so that would be a good topic. I'll bring it up.
and whether and to what extent this might affect the zoning bylaw, or the zoning bylaw might do something to relate to this. I've not seen anything to suggest how that might work, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility that it might be appropriate for the zoning bylaw to address this topic in some way. I'm not at all sure about that, then I can only speculate without thinking about, well,
Yeah.
what would we actually do that would make sense for this, and I don't know the answer to that.
I suppose it's, as we go through this, we'll also want to know how many towns and cities are doing what in this space. If we're plowing new ground, that's one thing. If we're following 100 others, that's something else.
Yes, and the video did mention Hopkinton and one other town that have done something along these lines, and they talk a little bit about how they feel they've benefited from it. But yes, a more comprehensive view of that would certainly be informative.
Okay.
So, like I said at the beginning, I think this sounds to me like a conversation starter, but at best it can get us to begin thinking about the topic and exploring it further when and as we are feel we want to do so. So anything else on the sprinkler topic at this point? Just something to, another thing to tuck into our minds. Okay, moving on then. Complete streets.
So I do have an update on that. I have not gotten a draft policy pulled together. Since we have time, I'm happy to go through on the guidance document what the scoring that they do for the complete streets policy. So once we draft one and send it to the select board, they would adopt the complete street policy, and what that does, then that goes off to Mass DOT. They have a rubric where they score it. It needs to meet at least 80 points. Otherwise, it comes back to us for revisions. But if it scores 80 points or above, then it gets accepted by Mass DOT, and we proceed to Tier 2. What I'd like to do, there's also a provision that if the select board issues a notice or a letter of intent, they can proceed right to Tier 2. And what that letter of intent does is the select board commits to adopting a policy within 1 year. So that's something that I'd like to bring to them as an option that allows us to finalize our complete streets policy, but we can actually apply for funding and get started on the tier 2 work while we adopt a policy.
And we want to be adopted because,
So yeah, so the benefits of complete streets, after you go through tier 2, which is the prioritization plan, what that does is it looks at streetscapes in town, and it identifies projects that you can do, not on state-owned roads but on local roads, and it creates a snapshot of in 5-10 years what can we accomplish. And it looks at specifically developing them in projects that are right around $300,000. And the tier 3 funding is a kind of a cycle of you can apply for tier 3 funding, which is up to $300,000. So sometimes the projects need to be a little bit more, so those would require additional funding from other sources, but we try to prioritize them right around 300,000 to.
and is anything actually required from us in this process?
We will be looking for input on like the prioritization plan. It develops kind of year by year which projects you want to start with. You're not necessarily bound to that. That can change, but it at least gives a roadmap of completing projects for those 10 years or however many years are needed to kind of bring all of the town streets up to those standards. So, which
Well,
is certainly a long time.
When we see what the standards, suggestions for standards are, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, so the complete streets, what it looks like for in terms of standards, I believe Mass DOT has the published standards. It looks at typically like 5-foot sidewalks, inclusion of bike lanes where possible. So it's not feasible in every location, but it sets standards that trying to achieve those in each project to allow not just vehicular traffic, but also accommodate pedestrians, cyclists, rollerbladers.
We're gonna have to look around for opportunities that aren't on state roads where there's enough land to come close to that.
Yeah, typically right away becomes a challenge in terms of fitting a lot of that infrastructure in. But through creative design, there is usually opportunity. But at a minimum, the prioritization plan looks at traffic counts and identifies the low-hanging fruit that is achievable, and then later on you work on the tougher projects.
A lot of our roads are two-rod roads, and once you take two-lane travel lanes out, there isn't too much left.
Right.
To what extent might the Complete Streets policy want to influence subdivision roadway design?
I think a lot of our subdivision rules and regs are fairly in line with it. That we'll look at, we may want to look at some of the design standards, including that as kind of how we had talked about design guidelines of suggested things that developers do, and we would then during our subdivision approval process consider those aspects of the roadway, the sidewalks that the developer's proposing. Where are sidewalks on both ends needed or realistic? Is it is really only one side of the road necessary for connections to schools and things like that?
That will be interesting. There should be opportunities there. I don't know, could you end up requiring more than 50 feet so that you have enough room to do these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think there may be and that's where the creative design could come into. I mean, when you have the right-of-way challenges, if you have a frontage setback, you may add in requirements that where the right-of-way is a certain width and you can't fit that pedestrian infrastructure necessarily, maybe that frontage is required to be paved or somehow otherwise providing some of that infrastructure to.
So that that is one thing that I would look for is potentially to modify the subdivision rules and
Yeah.
regs to facilitate complete
That's what I'm getting.
streets. And to some extent, that may not be done by way of regulation, it may be done by way of something more along the lines of design guidelines or recommended designs. But in some cases, we may want to change the regs to be consistent with complete streets.
Well, the 50-foot rule is in our subdivision rules, isn't it?
Yes.
So that wouldn't be too hard to, wow.
Yeah.
But you don't need town meeting
Right.
to do that.
Yeah, that's kind of, I'm thinking along those lines that,
Yeah, okay.
we're not, that's not something I wanted to try to tackle for
No, no.
our current
No, no.
rules and regs effort, but yes, that's something that can come down the line.
You just finished making a new set of drawings of the cross sections of the different road types.
Yeah, well, now those drawings are in a form that it's trivial to edit them.
Oh, what type of file?
It's in, it's a CAD file, it's a CAD format. It's DXF, which is an open source, sort of an open CAD format
Okay.
that most CAD
Yeah.
applications recognize. The CAD app I use is a non-commercial app, so it's not gonna do well with the AutoCAD files, but the files it works with are compatible with AutoCAD. AutoCAD can use them.
I gotta track down something that's usable by me, which is also free.
Yeah, QCAD is the one. Actually, QCAD I think was
On Macintosh?
it's on the Mac. Yeah,
QCAD.
yeah. I think there's a free version which is somewhat limited functionality. I think I paid like $39 for a fully functional. Yep, QCAD. Q, if you want to know, comes from Qt, the tool, the user interface toolkit it uses. More than the public needed to know right now, but that's for everybody's information. That's, the drawings are done in a way that are easily editable. Those I don't know how far back those old hand-drawn drawings were, but they're pretty
They were
old.
there when I got here.
Yep.
I think they had been done on a mimeograph machine originally.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, so anything else on complete streets for the moment? So we'll be waiting to hear more about that when the time comes. Next discussion item is Mill Redevelopment Overlay District. I assume we have nothing new to report on that
No,
yet.
so CMRPC is still working on some of that update work,
CMRPC 's
so. yeah.
working on that. And the last discussion item is subdivision rules and regulations update. We have forwarded the draft subdivision rules and regulations to our own engineering department, to Graves and to VHB for engineering review. We've gotten some feedback from Brian and at our own engineering department, and Brian promises us more. We got some feedback from Jeff at Graves. All of that feedback has been very helpful. We'll be waiting to hear more from Brian at least. We may or may not get anything back from VHB. Chris staff is reviewing it for items particularly relating to how staff works with the application, things like submittal requirements and processes and procedures. So we are waiting for additional feedback from those parties. Does anybody on the board have anything they would like to discuss on that topic this evening? If not, we can simply wait for the additional feedback, make some revisions based upon our engineers' reviews, and then continue reviewing it as a board. So,
I want to get to where we vote to hold a hearing.
yes, wouldn't that be nice? I think.
I'm about halfway through, and I'll put together a memo with all the feedback we've gotten so far, kind of summarizing it, putting it all as one document, and then hopefully at the next meeting we'll be able to do that.
And as I've said before, I would certainly all the board members have an opportunity to read through it in great detail. Try to wade through the Microsoft Word markup, which isn't always easy to read. And I did, as I said before the last meeting, I did prepare a summary document, a couple, 3 pages, summarizing all the changes that are being made here, you know, in a way that should be easier to follow. Some of the engineering comments are going to influence that slightly. But anyway, the summary document is something that I would put out for public consumption for the public to see at a kind of a high level what changes we are doing, and then of course there is the actual document in all of its gory detail.
Okay.
So if there's nothing more on that tonight, we can move on to our general business, which we have apparently no bills that need approval tonight. And we do have minutes of a previous meeting.
Move, we approve the minutes as drafted
I would,
for July 12th.
yeah, I would recommend one correction, that being that I don't think there was a Mr. Roberts at the meeting who is said to have stated that he has completed updates on the subdivision rules. I'm pretty sure that was referring to me, but using the
And
correct
my
name would be
motion,
good.
of course, includes,
Yes, the motion will include any changes discussed at the meeting here. Did I hear a second for the motion?
You did not, but I'll second it.
Okay. Moving
oh,
seconded that
he
the,
might have heard one, but you didn't. No one gave one.
the minutes of July 12th be approved as drafted with any changes discussed during this meeting tonight. Any other changes anybody saw? Hearing none, no further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare the motion carried unanimously. Thank you. And staff report.
Yeah, so I did want to touch on a couple things, although not related to this board, but definitely related to planning activities. I did work with the conservation agent on interviewing for their position, the assistant conservation agent. We got a number of very good candidates, and we have chosen and sent off an offer letter. I'll withhold on any announcements until we have received
That's probably a good
response
idea.
to that. But I did want to mention that that hopefully we will have a new member in the staff very soon. Staff also attended a pre-construction meeting for the Ridings subdivision over at 88 Adams Road. So we ran through the conditions with the developer and their team, and so we expect that will kind of start to kick off soon. There's still a couple items to be satisfied before the construction commences, but we're working with the developer on that.
Yeah, I'm seeing some markings on the pavement on Adams Road that appear to be associated with that.
Yep. There's also staff is working on finalizing the Mass Vulnerability Preparedness Annual Report. That's an important report that we'll be submitting and is related to our hazard mitigation plan update, which is in progress. We're also completing the 40R annual update, which is in relation to our smart growth zoning. Another important update to be had, because we will be seeking payments for the 40R in relation to the 8 Pine Street subdivision. So I'm also working on that paperwork as well.
You know how much money is involved there?
Sorry?
You know how much money is involved there?
I don't hold me to it, because I'm still confirming the formula. This is the first time we've run through this, but I believe it's close to a little shy of $950,000. It's paid per unit, and so at 318 units, it was a little shy of that. So
That goes into the general fund?
I believe so. Yes. Also working on paperwork for requesting new units to be added to our subsidized housing inventory. That's in relation to Prentice Place subdivision. So we'll be submitting that paperwork shortly as well. Also with 8 Pine Street and related to the 40R is the operating and expense reports. That's related to any adjustments that would be needed for the 40R payments. I did submit that paperwork to DCAM for their approval that that's the amount. So that's why I say don't hold me to that number yet. We're still waiting on some confirmation. Some of you and others in the public may have received requests for interviews related to our local rapid recovery plan. So those went out. We'll be doing a second round of interviews and hopefully finalizing that report in the next month or so. So that's still related to helping businesses in relation to impacts of COVID-19. And so we've been working with businesses and identifying issues and going over kind of ways in which, developing strategies to address those issues. And then lastly, coming up on Wednesday, staff will be conducting a site visit at the Highfield subdivision. They will be shortly submitting a determination of completeness request, so that's going to be before the board once we've kind of coordinated with the developer there and in terms of the pavement and infrastructure there and what is needed to have the town accepted as a public way. So, but that is what I have for staff report.
Question, I don't know the extent to which staff is currently involved in this, but I note that last week the select board voted to award the RFP to GSX for 17 and 27 Upton Street. I'm just curious about the next steps. I'm guessing that the next steps are that they will be preparing the equivalent of a purchase and sale agreement to set out the terms and timelines for doing their due diligence on the property and however much and whatever that's involved in, and then at some point the sale will be completed, and at some point before or after that, reflecting it's somewhat like the 8 Pine Street.
Yep.
Where they just now, once they got their permit from us, they were then able to consummate the sale. And so it's somewhere along the line there will be some permitting done, but that I don't know if that necessarily will take place before or after the sale, but I imagine that will take some time, and I don't know if anybody really has scoped that out yet.
Yeah, I imagine it'll follow a very similar process as 8 Pine Street, where they'll develop a purchase and sale agreement with the select board. Part of that purchase and sale, similar to 8 Pine Street, was that it was contingent that they receive local approvals. So once that purchase and sale is entered into, they'll start to seek planning board approval, conservation approval as needed, any other departments or boards that are needed for the project to move forward. We'll continue to work with the developer and finalize that.
Do you think they might come in and talk to us informally, early in there, really putting together what they want to build? I've always thought it was a good idea for people to do that. Can end up saving a good bit of time and money.
Yeah, we've had
You cover some of the bases on your development meeting, but
we've had members of the public who are interested, knowing of the RFP process. And what I've done is, we do have that on the town website, so I would encourage anyone interested in the project to review that RFP. It is somewhat conceptual, and I think that'll, there may be some changes to that as we go through local permitting, but it's a good.
the thing is, I remember the last special permit up there was going to be for just a cell tower. And the whole town took off about it. It was a big, huge thing. Maybe having dialogue in a public setting early on might help that move along better than that cell tower did. It ended up being denied and upheld in federal court.
Yeah, what I can do is I'll reach out and see if they'd be interested. I'm sure they would. Love to come in and kind of discuss the project. So.
Yeah.
I do kind of imagine they might like to actually get the project completed and, working with us, fairly early on to get a sense of, what the potential obstacles are and the concerns are would, certainly wouldn't hurt.
Yep. I'm not sure that they have very many other opportunities to interact with the community, just the people of the town. We've already seen on social media that there are people quite interested in the subject.
Yes, I think you could say that. Okay. Anything else? Anything else for staff here? If not, moving on, correspondence. Was there anything of note in the correspondence?
anything.
Nothing caught my eye.
It's all very
Worcester.
So, reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC. Anything to report?
Pretty quiet right now.
It's relatively quiet. The only thing I have to really bring back is, as many of you are aware, that Town Common actually has begun its work. They're looking at still getting some change orders in place. One is to alter the gazebo to repair its boards and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's another one that I guess the water district asked the town to take on to move the backflow preventer up.
Did move.
A backflow preventer up from underground to above ground since we're digging in the area. I don't know much more about that yet. That was just briefly mentioned at the CPC meeting last Thursday, but that was going on there. And then we started talking about our projects for this coming fall town meeting, but nothing that is set in stone yet.
Yeah, I do remember hearing about the backflow preventer quite some months ago in some discussion about that project, somewhere along the line.
How's the question of accommodation, access to the gazebo?
They're looking at doing, this is not final because there's no change order made yet, but they're looking at doing the shallower slope so they don't need a handrail along the side of it, but it would wrap more of the gazebo to do that, and then having it just walk on after that slope gets to the top. So I forget the exact
I wonder if it
percentage.
might not be better for it to go most of the way around in terms of, it's gonna look strange
Yeah.
with the drawings that I saw that were going about a quarter of the way around.
Yeah.
Okay.
That they're looking to have that in front of the select board. They were hoping by their next or second meeting of August.
All right, is that it for
That's it for me.
planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC? Hearing nothing else, is there anything else that may lawfully come before the board?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried, motion carried unanimously.
Maybe the
Thank
short-
you all and good night.